You are wearing something right now. You probably did not think about why. You just put it on. It felt normal. It felt automatic. But there was a moment in human history when no one on Earth wore anything at all. And then something changed. And the reason it changed is nothing like what you were taught in school. For most of human history, your ancestors were naked, not because they were primitive, not because they had not thought of clothing, but because they did not need it. Early humans evolved in East Africa. The temperature was stable. The savanna was hot. The body had already solved the problem. Fur had disappeared from our skin hundreds of thousands of years before clothing arrived. Because fur traps heat, and your ancestors needed to cool down fast. They learned to sweat. They learned to run for hours under the sun, chasing prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Nakedness was not a failure. It was a biological advantage. So what changed? Roughly 170,000 years ago, something went wrong with the planet. The Earth entered a period of extreme cold. Temperatures dropped sharply. Rainfall collapsed. The grasslands your ancestors depended on shrank to almost nothing. Food became scarce. Water became scarce. Entire populations began to disappear. Geneticists studying ancient human DNA have found a terrifying signal buried in our genes, a genetic bottleneck, evidence that the total human population may have crashed to as few as 10,000 individuals. Some estimates say fewer. The entire human species reduced to a group smaller than the population of a small town. The species nearly ended. And somewhere in that cold, in that desperate surviving remnant of humanity, someone picked up an animal skin and held it against their body and felt warmth for the first time that did not come from fire. That was the beginning. But here's what nobody tells you. Clothing did not actually start as warmth. The oldest evidence we have points to something far stranger: lice. In 2003, a team of scientists used genetic sequencing to trace the evolutionary split between head lice and body lice. These are two separate populations of the same species. Head lice live in hair. Body lice live in clothing. They evolved apart the moment fabric appeared between skin and the world. When researchers traced back exactly when that split happened, they landed on a specific number, between 83,000 and 170,000 years ago. That's when clothing began, not when the first needle was carved from bone, not when the first hide was scraped and stretched, when lice evolved to live in fabric. The lice remember what we forgot. But even that doesn't explain everything. Because here's what the full body of evidence actually shows. The oldest sewing needles ever found date to around 50,000 years ago. They were discovered in Siberia, made from bird bone, incredibly fine, remarkably precise. But clothing fibers, colored beads, and ochre-stained shells used to decorate the human body appear in the archaeological record in Africa nearly 100,000 years ago. 50,000 years before anyone in Siberia was sewing hide together for warmth, people in Africa were stringing shells and pressing red ochre into their skin. They were not trying to stay warm. The African climate did not require it. They were doing something else entirely. They were signaling. In every human society ever studied, across every continent, every era, every culture, clothing and body decoration serve the same core function. They communicate. They tell every pair of eyes that land on you exactly who you are, your group, your status, your availability, your alliances, your power. A shell necklace worn by a young woman 100,000 years ago on the coast of Africa was not fashion. It was a message broadcast to everyone who saw her. And the people who could signal well, who could communicate clearly without speaking, who could attract stronger partners and build deeper alliances, survived in greater numbers. Their children survived. Their grandchildren survived. And the instinct to decorate, to signal, to be seen in a particular way was passed down through every generation in an unbroken chain until it arrived inside you. That impulse you feel when you stand in front of your wardrobe in the morning and reach for one thing instead of another, when you want to look a certain way for a certain person in a certain room, when something feels right to wear and you can't explain why, that is not vanity. That is not insecurity. That is 100,000 years of survival running silently in the background of every choice you make. The cold made clothing useful, but the cold did not create it. It was created by something older than cold, something deeper than survival. The need to be seen, the need to say without a single word, this is who I am, this is where I belong, this is what I'm worth. Your ancestors said all of that with a shell on a string and red ochre pressed into their skin. You say it every single morning before you walk out the door. And you've been saying it longer than you will ever know.